After covering the ashes of the bear, everyone broke up into their roles. Xochitl began by cutting firewood. She was careful to find trees that were either already dead or at least dying before cutting them with the axe, splitting logs with a single blow with her chipped grade 4 titanium axe. "Careful with that axe, they're expensive to replace," Marcus called out while he grabbed the cooking stove and all in the food, while Xochitl waved back. Setting up the bear-proof food containers, he put the cold food in the cooler. As Mixcoatl traveled to the woods, setting up the observation stations and traps. Cameras would have to be set up in the trees to see if anything might try to sneak into the camp, along with snares to try and catch the fortune teller. It was no guarantee that the traps, or even the cameras, would catch the fortune teller, but it made things just a bit safer knowing what was out there, rather than just wandering the woods with no guidance. As Marcus continued to stack the stones in the clearing to make a fire pit, he heard a loud clang and Xochitl swearing when the clang was heard. "You hurt?" he called out, pausing his stone piling to glance over at Xochitl. She dropped the axe on the ground, and both her pants and shoes had a long gash in them from where the axe cut through it when she missed the swing. "No, I'm fine. I just hit my foot by mistake, so now my clothes are all ruined. I think I might have chipped the axe again," Xochitl said as she ran back to the van to grab a change of clothes while Marcus sighed. "Damn it, not again. I'm glad you're not hurt, but grade 4 titanium is expensive, and a blacksmith who can work with it is even more expensive to pay for. But are you sure you're fine?" Marcus asked as Xochitl called back from the van. "Yes, it didn't even break the skin," Xochitl yelled back, while she searched through the crates for spare pants. Marcus turned back to the fire pit building, so it wouldn't let the fire spread, while he got lost in his thoughts. Xochitl was an Eximi, a person with extraordinary power. While Marcus wasn't sure of all of the details, he knew that Xochitl had greatly enhanced strength, speed, and durability. And he watched her fly at least once, but she did not want to explain that one to Marcus at all. But that was why all the equipment they had to be so durable. So Xochitl didn't accidentally take an axe and crumble it against a tree like an empty soda can. Marcus saw her do that more than once when they tried cheaper axes in the past. Now it was just cheaper to splurge on the most durable items that didn't break right away. While it may have seemed obvious to have an Eximi like her doing the fighting instead of a Typicam like Mixcoatl, except that Xochitl wasn't a fighter. She didn't enjoy fighting, and being a natural empath meant she could feel her opponent's pain just like her own, making it almost impossible for her to fight a monster, let alone kill it. But there were exceptions, such as on the Naglfari when she killed a sufferer who nearly killed Mixcoatl. She had nightmares for weeks afterwards, but she did it. Even so, both Mixcoatl and Marcus agreed she would not be asked to fight unless there was nothing else that could be done. The fire pit, now finished, Marcus placed some of the split logs into the fire pit, built almost as a triangle. Ready for the night, the fire pit now done, Marcus focused on the other necessary but less fun parts for camping out in the northern forest, such as digging a latrine far from the van and farther from the food. After a few hours, Mixcoatl came back with his map, marking the locations of the cameras and traps in the woods. Laying the map down on a freshly set-up table, Mixcoatl, Marcus, and Xochitl sat around it while looking over the grid of the valley. The van was near the entrance, and there were 3 red X's over a part of the northern valley. "He's not there. I started searching there. No evidence of the fortune teller there. All the animals were behaving normally. But here," he points at a grid 3 squares away and circled in yellow. "There were no animals, no breeze, and the smell of rot in the air, but no buzzards in the air. If I was to guess, there's either another augury there, if not the fortune teller himself. But I decided to come back so we could all take a look into it." "Do you think it's a good idea?" Mixcoatl asked. Marcus first turned to Mixcoatl, then Xochitl, who then spoke up. It's a good place to start, better than traipsing through the woods. It would take us nearly 2 weeks to comb through these woods properly. If we start there, we may save some time, and if all else fails, I have a feeling we'll understand our foe just a bit better, Xochitl said, and it was now Marcus's turn to speak. It feels like it may be a trap to me. We know the fortune teller is intelligent and has foresight, and Mixcoatl's path just happens across an area of the woods that has the fortune teller when there's acres of forest to hide in. Suspicious, at best. Unfortunately, I cannot think of anything better to do. If we go in well armed and prepared, we may be able to defeat it. But even if it is a trap, we will learn a lot more about the fortune teller. Dealing with a fox or dealing with a wolf. He finished with a quote, while the other two nodded solemnly. The quote was about dealing with monsters. From a distance, a fox and a wolf may look very similar, but while one was clever and could outsmart a hunter, the other could hunt the hunter. The trouble, though, was it was impossible to tell which was which until they got close to it. Well, I'll grab my guns, Maria said, tying her hair behind her head while heading back to the van. When they left the campsite traveling north, they didn't speak at all, sticking to expressions and sign language to communicate with each other. Xochitl had her knives for throwing, and Mixcoatl carried his crossbow, while Maria had her modified standard infantry rifle and her sidearms. At first, the woods were peaceful. Numerous bird calls could be heard, and if Maria observed the branches and bushes carefully, she could catch flashes of the beautiful birds. She could also see deer in the woods, who would watch the hunters with cautious eyes, unsure whether it was better to stay or run. As they traveled into the woods, Maria also saw evidence of the more esoteric residents. In between two branches, a single rose grew from a circle of mushrooms, a trap for anyone who wanted to collect the rose. The thief would prick their fingers on the thorns and then be dragged into the fairy circle, never to be seen again. Maria could also see just beyond the edge of the trees a stairway to nowhere, well maintained and out of place. Despite the different nature, it was for all intents and purposes a trap, just like the fairy circle. They knew better than to check it out. Only humans were dumb enough to be caught by the staircase, and Maria didn't want to be that dumb human. The strangest thing to be seen so far was the bleeding trees. Xochitl grabbed a branch of a tree while bracing herself, and she snapped the branch off of the trunk. After seeing the color of the sap, she threw the branch and hissed. "Did it get on you?" Mixcoatl whispered. Xochitl shook her hands, lifted them to her face before showing it to both Mixcoatl and Maria. Sure enough, no blood and no sap on her hands. Blood trees were exceedingly rare, but they did exist in the northern forest. The sap had the same consistency, color, smell, and taste as human blood, but it was highly poisonous and corrosive, and most people believed the sap to be cursed to anyone who touched it. Part of the reason why they were so rare was that blood tree seeds had to be planted within a human heart, and the roots would grow through the bones of the body buried to fertilize the tree. Maria examined the tree roots, and sure enough, peeking out from where the trunk met the roots was a human skull. It was very old, with soil within the sockets and small sprouts growing from the eyes, and the mandible was down, so the skull looked like it was still screaming. Even as Maria watched, some of the blood tree sap leaked out from behind the skull, making it look like the skull was anointed in blood. "Keep moving," Maria signed to the rest of the group. She wanted to get away from that skull, and the tree was making her increasingly uncomfortable to be around. Even if she knew how to deal with blood trees, they were uncomfortable, and the branches above may just start leaking, or something else may occur. And as toxic as the sap was, there were still creatures that drew nutrition from it. Those same creatures could just as easily draw human blood to gain those same nutrients. While they continued to the territory where they thought the fortune teller was, silence shuddered through the shadows of the forest. The group crouched down and remained silent and still, waiting for either the danger to pass or for the attack to happen. Maria glanced through the trees, trying to find the fortune teller, letting her eyes adjust to the greenery, looking for any shapes that didn't belong, or for any motion. It was a skill that had to be worked on. People usually adjust to their own lives, but they wouldn't even notice when their path changed paths until they were tripping over it. But Maria had lots of practice trying to find things out of place. There, in the bushes about 5 meters away, something was moving and munching. Maria slowly signed to Mixcoatl and Xotchitl, who looked at the bushes. Mixcoatl then signed to Xotchitl. Danger? His pace indicated a question. While Maria stared at the bush for a moment, her expression confused while she brought 3 fingers together for both Maria and Mixcoatl to see. No, she signed. She took a deep breath and stood up, approaching the bushes. Mixcoatl looked like he was about to reach out for her, but then he stopped. He trusted her, and as much as he wanted to keep her safe, odds are whatever it was couldn't hurt her anyways. More munching noises could be heard from the bush as Xotchitl pushed the leaves aside to reveal what was eating and making those munching noises. The first thing Maria noticed was the large brown eyes. They looked mournful and intelligent. The creature was covered in brown fur that covered its body, and its forelegs were covered in mud. It also had 2 tusks that looked far too large for its body, and it was only as tall as Xotchitl was. And the creature was chewing on the berries that fell to the ground by grabbing it with its trunk like a prehensile limb and chewing away at it. It wasn't the fortune teller, it was a young mammoth. A megafauna pachyderm that was considered extinct by the exoteric scientific community. But just 20 years ago, many megafauna that were thought to be extinct were found to still be living in the northern forest. So officially, the creatures like the one that Xotchitl was petting were a Lazarus taxon, a species that were once thought to be extinct but were discovered to still be living. Where is the mother? Mixcoatl asked, keeping his crossbow ready, and Maria was in agreement with him. Herd animals didn't leave their young alone for long, if at all. But that was a more pressing question. If this young mammoth was out all alone, where was the mother? Or the herd? Dead, Xotchitl said in an almost trance-like state while she kept petting the young mammoth, who responded by wrapping its trunk around her other arm while she gently patted it on its forehead. Something killed the matriarch of the herd, tore it asunder. Her older sisters tried to help the matriarch, but they all got torn apart. Xotchitl's eyes were filled with tears, and so were the mammoths. Maria was unsure if she was crying because of what happened to the mammoth, because the mammoth was crying, or if the mammoth was crying because Xotchitl was crying. The young ones all had to run. It kept tearing the herd apart. She doesn't know if anyone else survived, Xotchitl said as she kept petting it. Her tears continued to fall. Mixcoatl crouched down next to her and whispered something that Maria couldn't hear. After another moment, Xotchitl nodded and stopped petting the mammoth as they continued their trek to the location where they thought the fortune teller was waiting. After about half an hour, they made it to where Mixcoatl thought the fortune teller was hiding. This part of the valley was mostly open space with sparse trees, but Maria was certain there was something quite wrong with this part of the valley. In one of the trees, nearly 20 meters off of the ground, the entrails from the large animal were left dangling. The soil beneath the blood was left a sickly shade of brown, no grass growing where the blood dripped and dried. The tree itself was already dying where it was touched, and Maria silently swore to herself. The augury remains were indeed cursed, and the fortune-teller was indeed leaving the remains out to spread corruption. Maria marked the location on her map. This area would have to be returned to destroy the corruption, or else it may spread and continue to kill, possibly leaving large parts of the northern forest uninhabitable. Something Maria wasn't going to let happen if she could help it. "I think he's deeper inside," Mixcoatl said, leading the group deeper into the sparse trees. His voice sounded wrong. There were no calls, no sound of wind, even though Maria could feel it, and his voice didn't echo. It passed once and then never again. Something about the fortune-teller's presence, or possibly his curse, seemed to make it so ambient noise didn't exist. The how was a difficult question that Maria was not likely to figure out without some major investigation and equipment that she didn't include. But the why it happened was something she might be able to figure out. Something that could help her figure out a possible weakness of the fortune-teller. Maybe it was vulnerable to sound, or it didn't enjoy it, or maybe the auguries themselves canceled it out. As they traveled closer, they made it to a circle of trees where the fortune-teller definitely made its lair. The trees were all lined with entrails, and the ground was full of the rotting hides of various animals and piles of stones. While Maria couldn't recognize all of them, she did recognize mammoths, bear, wolf, and moose. The fortune-teller didn't appear to discriminate, and sure enough, near the center of the lair laid a humanoid corpse. Even after death, the skin was still as pale as paper, the rib cage segmented and broken along the front. The heart was crushed and useless, but the lungs still gasped and moved as if it was still breathing. The entrails were dragged down and out of the corpse, and the most disturbing part was the face of the clown. The head was untouched. The clown's gray eyes stared up at the sky, its mouth still open in a wide, toothy grin, the still red veneer of its blood still on its teeth. The blood didn't coagulate like normal human blood. And then the most startling thing happened. The head laughed. It wasn't a loud cackle, but just a small enough laugh for Maria to know that something was still there. "The clown's still alive?" Mixcoatl asked incredulously. There was no heart, and it was left to rot among the cursed entrails, and still, the clown lived. The clowns of Caligula's carnival are cursed to keep living until their contract is fulfilled. But yeah, Poplicola gave me the impression that whoever was sent to catch the fortune-teller was killed. Maria responded, staring down at the clown's head, who stared back at her, which only seemed to make the clown head laugh just a bit louder. "I'm going to put it out of its misery," Mixcoatl said, lifting his crossbow and aiming it at the clown's head, which only brought a more demonic laugh from the clown's torn lips. Before Maria lifted her hand in response, indicating for him to put his crossbow down. Clowns don't bleed, and even if they did, part of the Treaty of Copper is we can't kill any employees of Caligula's carnival who didn't run away, Maria warned him. Mixcoatl, reluctantly, put his crossbow away. "What do you recommend we do?" he asked Maria, who sighed and then shrugged. "I'm not sure. We should just leave the clown alone until after the hunt, and then Poplicola can take care of it." At the end of that sentence, the clown stopped laughing. "He approaches," Xotchitl said, pointing towards another path through the trees, different from the one that they took to get into the lair. "Hide," she said as she dived away, while Mixcoatl also rushed to find somewhere safe to hide. Maria looked around the clearing to try to find her place to hide. She noticed a pile of rocks forming a small cave that would serve as a place for her to hide for a while. Glancing into the hole and confirming it didn't hide any snakes, spiders, nor any cursed entrails, she slid into the hole and peeked out, her rifle at the ready. Sure enough, she couldn't see Mixcoatl nor Xochitl, and there was no real way to communicate with them without alerting the fortune teller. Moments like these, everyone had to trust that they knew about the others, and also trust that they were thinking things thoroughly before any action was taken. Maria watched as she finally saw the fortune teller in the flesh for the first time. He was a lot smaller than she was imagining. In her mind, she imagined him as a towering individual. Instead, he was shorter than she was. He did still have the metal helm on his head. She could see scratch marks in the metal where he tried to peel it away, and at his neck she could see where the skin was starting to grow over the metal. It scabbed, and it was raw where the fortune teller was trying to peel his own skin away from the metal. And he also dragged behind him the body of a deer. The deer has clearly been dead for a short while, and unlike the other corpses, it still had flies around it. So whatever the curse was, it wasn't started by killing the creatures, but by something else. Maybe by the augury? Realizing something, Maria almost kicked herself. Of course, the fortune teller couldn't see. Hiding served very little, if any, purpose. Thinking her plan through, Maria crawled out of the hole and stood up straight, facing the fortune teller who was turned away from her. His hands plunged into the stomach of the deer, likely preparing to do his auguries. Maria shuddered her rifle, hoping it wasn't necessary, but she also knew that if she could fire upon the fortune teller in seconds. But she had to give him a chance. She had a lot of calluses and scars from her hands because of her choices, but she still kept them clean of blood, and she was going to keep it that way. "Fortune teller!" Maria yelled at him as he turned to face her. Even the front of the helm, where the face was supposed to be, was still just metal and torn skin. No eyes, no mouth, only a thin slit for his nose, so he could breathe. "Does the black moon howl?" she asked with a 5-word test to see how he responded, or even if he could respond. As a response, the fortune teller lifted his hands up to the skies, palms up, before turning his hands back, so his palms would face Maria. And now she could see the true horror that was the fortune teller's hands. His palms did indeed have mouths that were found to be filled with needle-like teeth, feeling the deep gullet of the fortune teller's hands. And deep down its throat, Maria could see the fortune teller did have eyes within the mouths on his blood-soaked hands. "She doesn't howl. She screams," the mouths said in unison as the fortune teller rushed towards Maria hands first. "Oh," she said as she unslung her rifle as she fired 3 shots into the fortune teller's chest. Blood flowed from the holes, but she also noticed the fortune teller didn't flinch. He may very well be beyond pain at this point. "Ah, Tavit," she said as she dodged his lunge, firing another shot, this time at his head, where it clanged harmlessly off of the metal helm. So that tactic wasn't going to be usable. Where else could she fire that she might cause damage? The fortune teller held his hands out, palms forward as he examined the area, looking for Maria. "His eyes," Maria said, waiting for the fortune teller to notice her. Sure enough, he noticed her, and the eye in his hand focused on her. As Maria held the rifle up to her shoulder, she aimed and then fired, firing the bullet down the throat and into the eye. The fortune teller screamed for the first time when that happened. Maria, now confident, held the rifle up to her shoulder again, waiting for the fortune teller to attack her. Instead, it crouched down on all fours, hiding its hands and its eyes, as it backed away slowly, like a spider trying to escape an angry shoe. Maria fired again at his heart, which didn't slow him down, but it made her feel better. The fortune teller slid into the woods where it disappeared. Maria, satisfied with what she did, was now wondering, where are Mixcoatl and Xochitl? Checking the clearing, she finally found where they were hiding. They were hiding behind a big berry bush, and she could see the broken twigs and their footprints. But she also saw that there was a trail leading away from the bush, looking like someone or something was dragging something heavy behind it. Someone or something dragged Mixcoatl and Xotchitl away. Either the fortune teller was a lot quicker than she thought, and he took them away while Maria was waiting for him, or, more ominously, the fortune teller wasn't alone, and someone disabled both Mixcoatl and Xotchitl and then dragged them away. Now Maria was all alone in trying to help her friends and in hunting the fortune teller. She turned away from the dragging trail and saw the fortune teller's trail. She could focus on the fortune teller and kill it right away, but her family was more important, and then they could take on the fortune teller together. Maria made her choice as she followed the drag marks to her unknown fate.